It's time to shrink down and take an inside look at how many gamers ventured into the backyard. Today, we see if anyone played Grounded. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I am BD, and this is Did Anyone Play, a series where we investigate, analyze, and determine the truth about how much gamers have actually played a game like Grounded. How do we do this? We use trophy and achievement milestones within games and then compare those results to an ever-growing database to evaluate and rank games compared to the rest of the industry. Using objective data and statistical comparisons, we can draw conclusions. We aren't reviewing the game in a traditional sense. Our goal is to provide analysis that can be better used to understand player preference while ignoring game sales and hype to ensure we see reality as it truly is. Please drop a like or a sub to the channel if you want more of these types of videos. We're just starting out, so anything you can do is very much appreciated. And a quick spoiler warning, as we may be talking about some elements of late game progression. So let's find out if anyone actually played Grounded on Xbox and Steam. Remember that all percentages we'll be talking about here come from the total number of players that actually launched and or played the game, not bought the game. So these results are a full reflection on how players played Grounded. The first milestone that players will reach is Burgle Flipper. This milestone is achieved when a player saves Burgle after the Oak Tree Lab explosion. It happens quite early in the game. So how many players made it to this milestone for Grounded? On Xbox, 22.5% of players got to this first milestone. For Steam, it was 45.6%. So let's pause here to evaluate. Both results are quite low, but on Xbox, having nearly 80% of players never make it to this first milestone is astonishing. Here's a quick look in graph form, and I've put the database average up there. The average for the database is currently at 73.8%. Remember, that is across all games and platform variations in our database. Knowing that, you can see that the result for Milestone 1 for Grounded is pretty horrific. Steam results are quite poor, but Xbox are at an all-time low here. And this has been a game that has been heavily marketed by Xbox and supported well by the developers. Regardless of that support, these results don't bode well for later milestones. One thing we should point out is that if you make your game easier or turn on cheats, it does disable achievements. So that might account for some of the lower numbers here, but if true, then that also means that players do not enjoy playing the game in the way the developers intended. So what is Grounded? It's a survival action-adventure game where your character has been shrunk down in the style of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids fame and must survive the backyard, dangerous bugs, and way too many spiders. You control one of 4 kids that you can level up, progress backyard technology, and ultimately try to get back home and big again. It was developed by Obsidian Entertainment and published by Xbox Game Studios. Grounded released for Xbox and Steam in September of 2022 after an early access period that started in July of 2020. The second milestone all players would likely reach is called Hedge Lab. This is awarded after a player completes the Hedge Lab. The Hedge Lab is essentially the first designed dungeon in the game and where players are most likely to go first if they're trying to progress the game. So for Steam, 23.8% of players made it this far, and for Xbox, only 9.1% of players did this. So take a second to soak that in. Less than 10% of players that tried Grounded on Xbox even finished the very first challenge hand-designed for the gamer to experience. Steam is better, but not by much. It's always good to understand the competition a game was up against when it launched. What was happening around September 27th of 2022 in the gaming world? Well, titles like Deathloop and Outer Wilds came out around this time on the platforms. Looking at Google Trends, here we see that Grounded in Blue is not registering at all. So competition was strong and hype for Grounded was very low. However, we should look at the early access launch to see what was there. So for July 28th of 2020, we can see that Destroy All Humans, Skater XL, and Yakuza Kiwami 2 released around that time. And the trend results are the same as you can see here. Hype was low and competition was strong. We like to pick a mid-game milestone for our third marker. For Grounded, we chose Black Ant Hill Lab. This is the likely lab a player will complete after the Hedge Lab and the Pond Lab have been completed. How many players are left at this point in the game? For Xbox, it is 4.8%. Steam has 13.4% left. So 95% of Xbox players have stopped playing Grounded before this point, and we can't say Steam is doing too much better. Well, how did Grounded do with critics? Metacritic for Xbox has it at an 82 out of 100, and for Steam the reviews show very positive recent and all-time, with over 50,000 reviews. These are solid reviews, and you can see that even major review outlets scored Grounded well. The most important milestone is our fourth one. This is for completing the main story and what we will ultimately be basing our final score on. It definitely shows how many players finished the game and truly played Grounded. This milestone is called Go Big, and it's awarded for completing the story arc, where the player successfully brews the embiggening cocktail and goes back to the main pad from the beginning of the game and start up the machine. Where does Grounded end up on the different platforms? On Xbox, 1.2% of players completed the game. For Steam, it was 3.5%. Let's pause here since we've reached the end of the game. We want to check the percentage of players that quit each platform after making it through the first milestone but failing to reach game completion. Here you can see that both Xbox and Steam perform very poorly, but I don't think that's a surprise at this point. Perhaps the degree to which they are performing poorly is, though. Each platform lost more than 90% of players who completed the first milestone. Grounded could not keep players engaged at all through the story arc. Finally, to get a feel for how the completionist treated this game, the rare milestone 5 chosen for Grounded is called Super Win. This milestone can be achieved if the player grows big but with a score of 100% on the endgame report card. This includes beating optional bosses, finding raw science, molars, notes, optional burgle chips, and more. For Xbox, we see that 0.2% of players reach this milestone, and for Steam, 0.4% of players did it. Now let's see the full picture. Here are the raw milestones for our platforms, and we've added the database averages for each milestone in gray for comparison purposes. Let's get into it. For Grounded, there's no sugarcoating what we see here. Both platforms perform well below the average. Steam actually looks good compared to Grounded on Xbox, but it's really just because Xbox does so damn poorly. Getting on to milestone 2, we see a continued reduction, and then going forward, there's a steady decline to the endgame. No positives to point out here, just a slow descent to oblivion. So that's our final tally for Grounded milestones. But now let's see how Grounded stacks up against all other games in our database and find out if anyone truly played this game. We use milestone 4 as our ultimate ranking target. Here are the results for each platform for milestone 4 once again. It's time to reveal the final score Grounded has in our database. Here we go. For Xbox and Steam, we're at a 0 out of 10. It can't be more clear that no one played Grounded regardless of the platform. So those are the scores. But let's see if we can tease out some other observations by looking at these results in different ways. It's time for the deep dive. Let's start with progressive player loss. Each milestone shows how many total players have stopped playing the game at that particular point. Xbox losses are big right away and keeps the lead throughout all milestones. The total loss of players is just staggering. Moving on, we can look at milestone player retention. This calculation only takes into account the player population loss as a percentage compared to the previous milestone. What you see here is huge percentage losses throughout the milestones as well. There's a hint of reduction in losses between milestone 2 and 3, which could indicate that players making their way through the labs wanted to see that finished out. But then there's a huge drop off to finishing the game. The only time Steam losses are larger is for the rare milestone 5. How about completionists? How did the rarest milestones shake out on the different platforms? Steam dominates here with over 2/3 of the completionist pie. And finally, we check on early versus late game retention. When you read a chart like this, the best performers are further away from the center of the circle. Early game Steam is strongest by far. For the end game, Xbox gets closer, but Steam is still in the lead. Finally, for completionists, we see Xbox edge out Steam where less players are lost. But remember from a previous graph, Steam had far more players complete the rare milestone. Let's take one final look at all the platforms and their milestone 4 results, but this time we show the full percent rank within our database. This is to give you a detailed view of how the rankings played out. Use this data as you will, but you will note that on Grounded, Xbox is a 0% rank. That means that Grounded on Xbox is the least played game we have ever seen to this point in our database. Let's wrap this up. So what are our major takeaways from all the data? Clearly no one played Grounded as the developers intended. The data doesn't lie. These are the worst numbers we've seen so far. By all accounts, Grounded was a flop with players who played the game. But that does stand in stark contrast to the critic and player reviews we saw. That may be a reflection on how great the first impression is of the game, but as players progress, they either start using cheats or reducing difficulty to progress, or simply stop playing. Perhaps the game's too challenging after a player gets into it a bit, and that's a turnoff. All we can say is at best, players are playing the game but don't want to play it like the developers intended. The worst we can say is no one played this game in any significant way. Another angle to look at is Game Pass, as this was an early and defining offering from Xbox Studios, and perhaps to keep up appearances, the continued development support gives a warm fuzzy to a community that may not play the game but appreciates the effort being put forth to improve and evolve the game. Grounded is an interesting survival game. The world that has been created by Obsidian is a compelling one. It has a cartoonish appeal that may drive away more serious survival game enthusiasts, but it provides an interesting handcrafted experience. The feeling of living the movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is pretty cool, but regardless, all of that can't change the data. It is the least played game we have ever analyzed. Hopefully, developers can learn from this and avoid these pitfalls in the future. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to do all the YouTube support stuff. I'd love to read any comments you have down below. What conclusions do you all take from this data? And of course, feel free to suggest the next game we should look into to determine if anyone played it. Until then, take care of yourself and each other.